Okay, so before we start, I'm sure some of you are probably a little uncomfortable, maybe not expecting that this was going to be in here, but I promise, no matter how uncomfortable you are, I am exponentially more so. But in all seriousness, my talk does contain stories and themes of sexual assault, so if at any point you feel anxious or an attack coming on or just uncomfortable in general, please feel free to step out. The bouncers may try and tell you that you can't leave, but it's my talk and I say you can. So, in the 1770s, a group of French writers called the Grub Street Hacks went against the monarchy's law and began illegally transporting pornographic material into the country to be sold to lower-class citizens. Now, these books became immensely popular, as you can imagine. Not only was there pornography being sold in almost every bookstore in the country, there was basically self-insert smutworks with the Queen of France, Marie Antoinette, being sold in almost every bookstore in the country. The Grub Street Hacks, through these books, began implementing Enlightenment ideas that eventually led to the French Revolution through these porn works. Now, this is the lesson I had one day last year in my World Civilizations class. That same day, we were assigned an argumentative speech about any topic we wanted. During lunch that day, I'd had some heated debates with my friends about pornography, and at the end of the period, I decided that I was determined to do my speech on pornography. After some explanation and promising that my speech would be academic and professional, my teacher hesitantly agreed. I ended up getting an A on the assignment, and I will remember it for the rest of my life. Not because of the grade, which granted was pretty cool, but because of the things that I learned and how pornography and sexualized media has potential to be exponentially more harmful than anything we ever expected. Ocean Recovery Center, a rehabilitation facility based in the UK, explains how consuming pornography and sexualized media can drastically alter our neurochemistry due to something called reward circuits. Now, a reward circuit is the part of your brain that allows you to seek pleasure. It encourages us to do things that make us happy, like eating, socializing, and, yes, having sex. The main instigator behind these reward circuits is dopamine, an incredibly strong feel-good hormone that causes us to want and crave. Dopamine is released right before a desired activity is performed, and the feel-good sensation reward that we receive at the end is actually from the release of opioids. Now, opioids are a natural chemical that our brain produces and releases after said feel-good thing is done. And it can even be from something as small as drinking a cool glass of water on a hot day. The Recovery Center has also found and explained how dopamine levels are generally stronger than our reward system, which causes us to constantly want more than we have or get. Because if we were constantly satisfied, we'd never actually get anything done. They have found that before sex, our dopamine levels are the highest out of all natural reward systems, which again includes eating, socializing, sleeping, etc. And the center has even found that our dopamine levels before sexual activity are comparable to those found with hard drugs like cocaine and morphine. Now, how can exposure to pornography and sexualized media be harmful? This year in my health class, we were talking to our teacher about how important good health programs are in schools. And she confided in us her fear at how young children were being exposed to pornographic material. She told us stories of receiving anonymous questions that could only be inspired from pornography from kids as young as 8 years old. And her theories were heartbreakingly confirmed by the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children when they explained that most kids who visit porn sites are actually going there to find information about sexual and romantic relationships. And that 22% of underage visitors to these porn sites are younger than 10 years old. Now, certain sites on the internet are not the only places we see sexualized media. We can also find it in movies and music videos, billboards, even down to the clever titles that they put on the bottom of nail polish bottles. We live in an incredibly sexualized world. It's all over the place. Now, this is probably the point at which most of you are thinking, if it's everywhere, we see it all the time, and not all of us are raging monsters, is it really that bad? However, in reality, we find that sexualized media and pornography without, and here's the key part, without representation or proper education can be incredibly harmful and detrimental to our physical and mental health, especially those of us who are too young to really know the difference. Now, for those of us in the room who have experienced sexual assault, we all know and remember the consuming ache that overcomes you when you realize you're not really being seen as a fellow human being. For me and my experience, that consuming ache was really more overcome with a horror that I was realizing all of this about 5 years too late. You see, when I was 8 years old, I went to a pool party to celebrate the end of the school year, start of the summer. Everyone was really excited. As we were changing, I remember giggling to my friend about how silly I was to have forgotten a second pair of underwear because I'd come with my swimsuit under my dress. The two boys who were hosting must have overheard my comment because after the party was over, they proceeded to chase me around their house, pin me against a wall, and feel up my dress. On the ride home, I remember being too afraid to tell my parents. I remember thinking that I was going to get in trouble because in my head, I was the one who had engaged in a sexual activity that I was obviously way too young for. In my head, on the car ride home, I remember thinking about Princess Leia in Star Wars being held in chains by Jabba the Hutt. And in my head, that's what a woman in a sexual position or relationship was supposed to be. We were supposed to be held back and restrained, and we weren't really supposed to like it. It's taken me 5 years and hearing the words verbatim from my mother's mouth before I realized that it really wasn't my fault and that I hadn't done anything wrong. And yet, still to this day, I find myself in the shower rubbing my skin raw, trying to wash off the feeling of their hands. Now, Darkness to Light, a nonprofit focused on educating on sexual exploitation, has explained and found that 1 in 10 people will be raped or sexually assaulted before their 18th birthday. That half of all rape victims are minors. And they believe that only 40% of victims are speaking up about their assault. The National Online Resource Center for Violence Against Women published in a paper how watching pornography can be an important factor in men or anyone developing male-dominated sexual views and can lead to the breakdown of a victim's confidence in resisting unwanted sexual activity. Beyond the obvious and stated physical harm watching and consuming sexualized media and pornography can put us through, it can also be incredibly harmful to our mental health. Live Science, a science news publisher, explained and published through a study that teenage brains are still developing, obviously, because the rest of us is still developing. And they explained that our reward circuits are even greater than those of our adult counterparts who have fully developed brains around the age of 25. The publisher, Live Science, explained that because our reward circuits are so high, and which is what gives us that expectation and stereotype of teenagers being irresponsible and reckless. These reward circuits that cause these expectations is what allows teenagers to be more susceptible to addictions. And the site also explained how having one addiction can predispose you to having another one, which includes the commonly mentioned, talked about, warned of drugs and alcohol addictions, and the less thought of or mentioned behavioral addictions, like counting the calories on the side of a menu before you order your food. Psych Central, a mental health network, found that women whose partners have a drug addiction are more likely to develop eating disorders or preoccupations with body fat and food. And the Dove Self-Esteem Project agreed with this, explaining how media can affect and sculpt our society's expectations of what a woman is supposed to look like, of what is considered sexy or beautiful. It tells us that the only way we'll be accepted or wanted is if we have the perfect hourglass figure, perfectly curled hair, and perfectly done makeup. While there's certainly nothing wrong with really liking or having this body type, it can be incredibly harmful to those of us who don't have it. Now, as I'm giving this talk, my baby sister Tegan is right there. You should all look at her. And she's cowering. She is 8 years old, the same age I was. She is learning how to subtract 3-digit numbers. She's beginning to multiply. Her absolute favorite thing in the world is dragons. And she just finished her first chapter series about a class hamster named Humphrey. I want a world for her that's safer than the one that I had. I want her to grow up in a society where she feels safe and comfortable voicing her questions about her sexuality or her body. And I want her to be given responsible and accurate information back as a response. I want her to grow up in a society and a world where she sees beautiful, healthy relationships in the media of all kinds. And I want a society for her to grow up in where she doesn't have to fear herself or her sexuality, or God forbid she ever feel that there is a single thing that is wrong with her. I want a future for her and for all of us where we have a safer and more open dialogue about sex.